Okay, welcome to all of you. And sorry about the little delay. We just wanted enough of you to get there. But thank you for everybody for joining us today for what I think is going to be a really great conversation highlighting the critical role of women in the peace building field. And we're very lucky to have two incredibly impressive women, Suzan Aref from Iraq and Dr. Fatima Akilu from Nigeria, to talk about their work and current issues. And I'm going to introduce them shortly. But first, I did want to start by acknowledging that we are meeting at a difficult and challenging time. I mean, we've had a second, as many of you know, horrific school shooting here in the US in just over a week. The ongoing atrocities in Ukraine and violence in many other countries, it's a little hard to deal with it all. So I think we're all kind of questioning how we are navigating and responding to the conflict dynamics around the world. But I hope hearing from these two women and the work that they're doing will give us a little hope. So the agenda Laura can show in just a moment. It's very straightforward. Before I introduce them, I'm going to just say a brief word on Karuna Connectors and set the stage for their talks before leaving plenty of time for questions and answers. So just in brief, Karuna Connectors is basically an opportunity for people who are interested in taking a deeper dive and sort of a deeper understanding of what this peace building work is about and hearing directly from our partners and practitioners about the work, and to help expand the network of supporters and partners. And so we organized this Karuna Connector session because of Karuna's experience over decades now, working closely with women peace builders around the world and really seeing their role as more vital than ever. And we wanted to highlight the critical, multifaceted role that women play in complex conflicts and humanitarian crises, and explore and talk about a little bit more how to empower women peace builders. So just a few basic facts: that women are often the most impacted by crises. They bear the brunt of conflict. And they often pay a higher price, from increased gender discrimination and violence to the erosion of gender-sensitive structures and programs. And yet women, and there's a lot of research on this, still remain largely excluded from participating in peace processes, despite the overwhelming evidence showing that women's involvement in peace building and mediation leads to lasting positive peace that goes well beyond ending war. Yesterday, in fact, I don't know if we have any colleagues with us from Beyond Conflict, but they hosted a talk with Monica Williams from Northern Ireland, who's an amazing peace activist. And really that work kind of highlights the power of women's coalitions. They played in the Northern Ireland conflict, played a very important role and respected as honest brokers, because they could, representing communities on both sides of the conflict, which allowed them to sort of lead important back channel conversations. And, although there's been a lot of progress since the adoption in 2000 of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, which affirms the critical role of women in peace building, women's direct participation and representation in formal peace processes continues to lag. And I think, with COVID, most recently, the COVID outbreak has really put into more stark relief the full extent of gender inequality around the world, and particularly in conflict-affected areas. And I think increases the urgency of fostering gender-inclusive and gender-sensitive approaches for building sustainable peace. So finally, in this context, I just wanted to end these opening remarks saying that really, empowering women leaders to participate in peace building at all levels becomes increasingly crucial. And I'm sure you're going to hear more about that from Suzan and Fatima. And a few key points from the body of research on this is it really demonstrates how women's participation, whether in official negotiating level roles or at the grassroots efforts level, contributes to sustainable peace. It's been proven that women who participate in peace processes tend to represent broader and more diverse constituencies, which is ensuring that a range of views and interests are represented. Israeli and Palestinian women, for example, have long built coalitions across national and ethnic lines. Women generally are also able to broaden the agenda and raise social issues in negotiations that help societies reconcile and recover. And women often take collaborative approaches to peace making and organize, across cultural and sectarian divides. They're really better at working across lines, which again increases the prospects of long-term stability. And evidence shows, as is mentioned in Northern Ireland, that including women at the peace table can increase the likelihood of reaching an agreement, because women are often viewed as honest brokers because they tend to operate outside traditional power structures and therefore are more widely perceived to be politically impartial mediators. So with that little sort of background, I want to introduce both of them and then we will hear them speak. And just as a note, please, we're leaving time for questions, so please use the chat function just to put in any questions we have. So I will start by introducing Dr. Fatima Akilu, who has a very broad and impressive background. She's currently the executive director of the Neem Foundation, with whom Karuna is actively working right now on a very successful program in Nigeria. She also has the psychosocial services component of the foundation and is a trained psychologist with over 20 years of experience in the field of mental health and psychology. She's taught and authored research papers and as a professor, and previously worked for the government, pioneering the development of Nigeria's Countering Violent Extremism program when she was the director of the Behavioral Analysis and Strategic Communications at the Office of the National Security Advisor. And so happy that you can join us today. Suzan Aref is a noted human rights and civil society activist and founder of Women Empowerment Organization, or WEO, which started in 2004, which is an independent nonprofit organization based in Erbil, Iraq, but operates in multiple locations around the country. And it promotes gender equality and fair opportunities for women to participate meaningfully in all spheres of life. And it works to end all forms of gender-based violence. And also it works at the policy level to implement gender-sensitive policies and laws. And Karuna had the pleasure of working with WEO several years ago in Iraq, working on implementing UN Security Council Resolution 1325. And Suzan coordinates a large group of civil society organizations in Iraq focused on implementing 1325. And she's worked with the government of Iraq and the Kurdistan regional government in developing national action plans, and has represented the government of Iraq twice at the UN to update them on the progress in implementing 1325. So with that, I am going to turn it over to them. And I think we will start with Suzan, and we'll hope that Fatima's, who's having some little internet challenges, will be will be good in a little while. So Suzan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you, Polly. It's an honor for me to be here. Thank you for your introduction. Of course, for me at WEO, we believe strongly that human rights, freedom, access to and control over power and resource belong to both men and women without any discrimination. We have our strategies working at WEO for women empowerment, enhanced women agency, to participate effectively in all political, social, economic, culture, peace, and security process at all level and sphere within the Iraqi society. Also, ending gender-based violence, eliminate all forms of gender-based violence and mitigate its effect on survivors and their families. Policy development, as you said, and reform, adoption and implementation of gender-sensitive policies, laws and plans to ensure equal opportunity, participation, and fair sharing of resource. Of course, under each of the strategy objective, we are implementing different kind of project for livelihood projects, economic empowerment, and of course, political participation, leadership for women, ending all kind of discrimination, especially on law. We are doing a lot of advocacy campaign. Also, we create the initiative that led on developing the first national action plan in Iraq on women, peace, security. And this is how Iraq became the first country in Middle East and North Africa having the first national action plan with the role of civil society. Because of the initiative from civil society. So this is how created the political from the government, the state actors from government and parliament to work and to build the partnership with them. So this is the role of women activists, women feminists, and women organization, how to have the influence to reflect the international tool, the international law on the local ground. So this is what we did. And also how to give the ownership to government. So now government is leading on, they led on the development of the second NAP and also the implementation. So this is a big success, like just transferring the ownership from civil society to government. And now we took back another step of monitoring. So now our role, it's mostly about monitoring the implementation, to continue the advocacy on the implementation, on allocating resource, amplifying the voice of women about their suffer, their challenges, women inside camps, women return back to their places, about the services, provide the service like for service provider, the capacity building for them, and also provide the service to women and girls directly, because we know in a fragile state and with weak of all the services, of course, women organizations have to take place and to fill the gaps and to provide the services for women. And what women organizations doing, they are working on different levels. It is the level of advocacy, level of providing services, level of capacity building for service providers from different institutions, build that, you know, with even the political will, it's fragile, it's not sustainable. So this is why we have to have this kind of advocacy and influence on continuous basis. Beside that, of course, we are also facing challenges of this. As I mentioned, it is instability, fragile state, they're cutting fund from local organizations, especially with the conflict and war. Mostly the funds goes to international organization and UN agencies. The discriminative laws and legislation, the patriotic society and the patriotic institutions that we have. So this is all, it is challenges, and also the lack of coordination and cooperation at all the levels. The mindset and the stigma that connected to women victims, this is a big problem. And still women issue, it's not a priority. It is not on government agenda. The lack of resource, of budgets. We can see all the budgets, it goes to military, but there is zero budget for women issues, for the strategies, to be able to implement the strategies and plan. Even we are talking proudly about the National Action Plan, and Iraq is the first country, but since there is no budget, it means there is no real implementation for the plan. So, and again, with all the discriminative laws that still exist in our countries. So how we can reach a peace and sustaining peace with all the discriminative laws that we have. We are still, even Iraq has signed the communique for ending sexual violence against women in 2016. The only thing, the outcome of this, it came only, they issued a law in 2021 for all the survivor from Turkmen, Yazidi, Christian, Shabak, the victims of ISIS for reparation, but it is only law. There's nothing on the ground as a response. So we want how to change the speeches, the promises, the laws to action. So this is need a real will. It need a budget. It need to believe in this, that the respond to victims or women issues. It is important because this is related to stabilization. This is related to peace building. And the big problem, because still women, they are not part of decision. They are on the table, but they are as a decoration on the table, not for meaningful participation, not to take a decision. So this is why even their participation, we cannot see any change. What I do with quota, if women going to be in parliament, taking a seat, but they are tool for their political parties. They are representing their parties, but they are not feminist, and they don't have the feminist approach. And I just want to give an example to prove this. Last cabinet of parliament, like most of women in parliament, they refuse to work in women committees because again, they have the stereotype. They want to be in other committees to show they are powerful. If they go to work in women committee, it means they are weak. So this is why they are in this committee. I don't want to take too much time, but honestly, there's a lot to talk about it, about women challenges and the challenges, it's too many. But I am here to answer any question, or if there's any more space, so I can take the space to talk more. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzan. That is terrific. I am sure there will be questions and there will be space for you to speak more. And it certainly is interesting on one hand, on paper, lots of successes, and yet the reality, as you just so articulately described, is a far cry from that progress that is there supposedly on paper. So yes, lots of challenges. Okay, so I think with that, everybody just remember, use the chat, put in questions. And now we are going to turn to Dr. Akilu. Hopefully internet, I see her, that's good. It's working. We're gonna turn it over to you, okay?
Thank you so much, Polly, and thank you for your great introduction. It's such a tall order having to speak after Suzan. Suzan, your work is just incredible. I see a lot of parallels and similarities to what we're facing here in Nigeria. And I just want to take a word to say that really we're all collectively feeling the stress and the tension of our world today. Whatever country you're in, you're not immune, from Europe to the US to the Middle East, and of course, also in Nigeria, we've just seen an explosion of conflict and distress. So women's leadership is needed much more than ever now. And so as I start my talk, I will crave your indulgence to turn off my video just to increase my bandwidth. And I'll turn it back at the end if you don't mind.
No, we definitely want to keep hearing you. So that's important.
I think for me, when I think about women's role and why it's important, let me start by really saying a few words about my own journey into this space. I entered the field of conflict really by accident and through government. And what I found there was, as Suzan said so eloquently, that at the decision-making tables, there were very few women. And that was really important for many reasons, because when you don't have women at the decision-making tables, I saw things that felt obvious to me. For example, in conflict, women's health suffers, just as one example. And that was not being addressed. The issue of children's trauma, women's trauma, community trauma, just didn't reach those tables. And overwhelmingly, these tables were led by men who had a very counter-terrorism mindset, where a lot of the resources were geared towards providing instruments of war, ammunition. I mean, they were happy to spend huge amounts of money on that, but not on, I think, the root causes of conflict, protecting civilians, really rehabilitating civilians, and even rehabilitating perpetrators of conflict. So what happened was a vicious cycle where the conflict continued. So the point I'm trying to make is that when there were women at the table, they were forced to have wider debates that really took into consideration what are society's needs. How do you end conflict? Can you end conflict militarily? And if you can't, what other things can you factor? So I think that's when we began to really think about a whole of society approach, looking across multiple departments as collaborators in this journey towards peace. So we would look at departments that traditionally would not have a seat at the table. For example, the Ministry of Youth, Ministry of Health, Education now became a national security issue because we were trying to look at the content of the learning, the children's experience. For the first time ever in Nigeria, trauma now became a centerpiece in responding to conflict. But on the field, I'm talking really more on the policy level. But on the field, what we see is that, as we all know, women are disproportionately affected by conflict. They bear most of the brunt of conflict, but also, I think at the very top, people are willing to outsource the community building to women because women have skills and talents and can do it, but they don't want them at the top decision-making tables, yet they want them to forge peace at the ground level, because women, skilled negotiators, they listen better, they have more patience. So we see this disconnect between what happens at the top and what happens at the bottom. And I think what we are trying to do at NEEM is to bridge this gap. So we also work at a policy level where you can influence a lot, both nationally in terms of the national action plans, but also in terms of how we respond to conflict, but also internationally. How do you get this on the international agenda? How do you get people to pay attention? How do you attract funding to these fundamental issues? But we also see it at the ground, where we use a lot of women in terms of negotiation, but we have a lot of programs where we do dialogue and negotiation, and in those programs we absolutely insist that women are at the table. What normally happens is that you go to meetings and it's all male dominated, and if they allow women, they relegate them to the back and their voices are not heard. This
Fatima, I think we've lost you, hopefully momentarily.
now does not make sense to me at all, because, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. We just lost you a second ago.
We lost her right after
My
she
apologies.
said women's
I
voices
think
aren't
I
heard.
Okay, try again, Fatima. We'll hope we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Which is an affiliate of ISIS. The structure of women within those movements are more responsive than the structure in our own society. And what I mean is that they use women in multiple roles. So they even have women in leadership roles where they need them. Whereas, so you have women in playing all sorts of roles, especially the wives of very senior commanders. And that is partly a recruitment ploy so that women can express their agency within the group. So you can have multiple roles within the group. And you don't have that in societies. And that has also been problematic in terms of the work we do in rehabilitating women who come back. So some women go into the group, they've held leadership roles and responsibilities within the group, they've felt empowered within the group, they come back either because they're captured by the military or through whatever means. And they come out to these very patriarchal societies where their voice no longer counts or they're no longer allowed to have a voice. So it's been very difficult for integration in terms of how do you get them anchored back into civil society when they return from these groups. So we have a lot of issues in terms of how do we really use the strengths and the skills of women and what they bring to the table when we look at negotiation and conflict. In Nigeria, there are multiple different levels of negotiation going on with bandits, with different branches of terrorist groups. And in all those negotiations, these are mostly facilitated by government. There are hardly any women that are on the table. So the informal negotiations, which are very effective, but at very small scales, you see a lot of women putting themselves out there, risking their life and doing these informal negotiations to bring about peace. I would just like to conclude by saying that we still have a really, really long way to go in terms of really having a complete architecture for peace, because one half of the society is missing from the elements of this architecture and are not allowed to play the roles that they should be playing. And therefore, what we see is holes and gaps within that architecture. And I think at the end of the day, the whole of society suffers because certain things are not really brought up on the table because of this absence of women. And these things are, as I said, these include women's health. We've seen that in conflict, women's health deteriorate. And we've also seen in terms of protection needs, that is not as effective when women's voices are not there. We've seen that when there are programs that target socioeconomic livelihoods, there's an assumption that's made that men are sometimes more in need of these socioeconomic livelihoods, yet women are the ones who are bearing the brunt of the family and the family's socioeconomic needs. So there is a lot that still needs to be done. And in the instances where we've worked with women, we've seen much more rapid progress and much more responsive, empathetic response to conflict that, in my view, has been very effective. So I think I will like to open it up at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fatima and Suzan, for those extremely eloquent. I see Suzan, you're raising your hand. Okay. Eloquent descriptions. Fatima, we lost you for just a little bit, but that I think we all follow. That was very interesting about the different hierarchies and structures of women's role in organizations like ISIS, where they were actually had more decision-making capacity and empowered, and the problems of rehabilitating them back into the patriarchal mainstream society in Nigeria. That is really an element of the rehabilitation I wasn't aware of. So that is very interesting, the challenges you're dealing with there. So we are opening it up. I don't see questions in the chat, but you can just raise your hand. But I'm going to first talk to, there's a lot. There's just a lot that you both have shared with us that we could dig deeper into. So I've got a few questions, but turning it first to Suzan, who's raised her hand and may want to add whatever question or addition. Over to you.
Yes, it is addition and also like a question. So I just want to highlight this point. Although Iraq have the first and second national action plan, but still the Iraqi legislators are not able to solve the problem of children born from marriage or rape, born from Yazidi women with ISIS fighter. So it is rape or it is marriage, because there's also a lot of Yazidi women who married ISIS and they born children. So because of the different religion of Yazidi and ISIS, so still they couldn't to find a solution for those children. So the women, they cannot keep their children because they are Muslim, because the Iraqi law, it says if it borns from a father, so it takes the father religious, so it's Muslim. So of course for Yazidi, it is difficult to keep that children because it is different religion. So those children, they are in orphan center. So, and also still they couldn't solve the problem of women and children linked to ISIS. So because she was the wife, or maybe even she divorced, or because he passed away, so still they are living inside camp. So I want to know what kind of peace and sustainability, stability that we are expecting of having all the children that born from ISIS with no identification, with no rights for school, for anything, for all women and children kept in camps, isolated from the community because the community refused them. So how they are not able, so why we have to be happy with having a national action plan, and what kind of implementation of the resolution 1325? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Suzan. This is, I feel like in both of the various challenges and issues you both described, it is this giant gap, both in different ways, right? Between, on one hand, real progress in both countries of, from, as Fatima said initially, there weren't women's voices, but then there are women's voices at the policy level, but the gap at the field. And just as you're saying, Suzan, in Iraq, great, you've got this national action plan, but then you've got these horrific disconnect or gap between the reality of what's happening on the ground. And these are the challenges. And I'm going to turn to a few of these questions. I'm going to start, I think this maybe Jenny's from our board, of asking, is the inclusion of women in these cultures more a question of socioeconomic, religious, or political concerns? So that is a question there. So Suzan, maybe you want to answer from in Iraq's case?
Yes, like for women in general, they are marginalized. Because mostly this is, we are living in a patriotic society. So we are not equal. There is the stereotype on women. If I talk about women in labor market, the last survey from the Ministry of Planning in Iraq, it shows that only 10% of women, they are in labor market. So it means it gave the big gaps between men and women. And also for minority, it will be double. So this is like, it is not like for minorities, yes, also they have a quota for their political participation, but they have less space and less chance for rights. And also we don't have equal rights as Iraqis, because like there's a different, like for Christian, they have their laws, and for Muslim, but again, constitution gives the right according to their sectarian. Like for women, Shia women and Sunni women, they have a different rights because they have to go back to their sectarian religious, what it's their right. So it means they are not enjoying like or the same rights. It is different right, but still they are living in the same country. So this is a big problem. And for women participation, as I said, the leadership and participation, it's still weak. It is like a decoration. And but even with having the resolution of 1325, because we know even the other convention like CEDAW and Beijing, and like mostly it focused on protection for women. Only resolution 1325 that focused on women participation. But we can see even the other followed law after resolution after 1325 again return to protection and prevention for women from sexual violence. So this is how we can focus more on equal opportunities and about gender equality. So how to focus more on women participation, because we cannot solve this problem if we cannot guarantee to have a feminist approach in policy level, in legislation level. Otherwise, it remains like this because all it's with the lack of gender lens in all the decisions and the laws, it not serve women and girls in Iraq.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was interesting your comment earlier, Suzan, that when you have women parliamentarians, but they don't want to work on quote unquote women's issues because it's seen as weak and too minor, so they go to the other issues. So you don't actually have, as you say, a feminist perspective, or people who are actually elected or in the parliament actually working on these issues to try to make changes.
Yeah, and the sad thing, like most of the women MPs, they are against the endorsement of the law to combat like the family law, to combat violence against women inside the family. So mostly even the women, more than half of the women, they are against to pass this law.
Wow. Fatima, I'm going to turn, the same question. And also I'm looking at Daniel's, sort of follow on, related to this, about the most effective strategies for trying to actually ensure that women's voices are included. He's written in conflict prevention and resolution, given what you've both described as this gap of, you have these policies, and I want to ask actually about the international side a bit later, but of how that can be more effective, that actually there is a translation from what you have at the national, at a policy level, that there isn't this big gap with what's actually happening on the ground. So Fatima, your thoughts on any and all of those issues?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think to the first question, it's all of those things, all of the above. I think, as Suzan has said, we live in at least in our part of the world, very patriarchal society. I think men have been so used to being in those positions of power, they don't want to allow anyone else in. They don't want to share that space. we have seen in Nigeria a reversal in terms of access and opportunities for women at the political level. There are so few women in elected positions. I think only 13 women in Congress or something like that. Also in appointed offices, with every administration, you have fewer and fewer women. Recently, there was a bill that was passed, they tried to pass in Parliament that would give more equity to women, and it was overwhelmingly in this mostly male Parliament voted down. And we mustn't forget that in some cases, in some places, women are great upholders of patriarchy. So it's a battle on many fronts. So you have to also educate women and not just focus on getting the men to change. We work in a lot of villages where the women don't understand why they should be at the table or allow any other woman to voice their opinion, because they've grown up in this structure that's been passed down to them generationally. So there is a lot of work to be done in terms of, and I think it's also the perception of women and women's agency, women's role in the world and in the society. There is this perception that when you talk about peace talks, negotiations, conflict space, that this is dangerous space, and women don't have any business being in these dangerous spaces. So I think sometimes they're excluded with the belief that these are roles that are best left to men. But how do we change this going forward? As I said, we've seen incredible work from very brave women who have put themselves at the table, who have negotiated multiple peace, informal peace processes. We've seen women who have on their own negotiated with Boko Haram and had hostages released in ways that even the government could not do. So we've seen that when women stand up and put themselves forward, that they are very effective. The problem is that they are often left without protection and really on their own to do this work. So the challenge for us is to get government to recognize the effectiveness of these women and to bring them on, because these skills could also help the government, because we haven't had too much success with a lot of the different negotiations that the government has been embarking on for the last 15 years. So maybe a different approach, having more women. But I think the idea of certainly religion, the way that it's practiced in northern Nigeria, does not help at all today, because a lot of the way that the religion, Islam is what I'm talking about, is practiced, really is very exclusionary towards women in many spheres, not just in this sphere. So to get these really powerful Muslim leaders to appreciate that having women participation in peace processes, in negotiations, in the conflict space, it's not incompatible with their religion, and actually can enhance the ability to have more national peace, is the challenge that we face every day in Nigeria.
Is there any, just following up on that, Fatima, are there any positive examples to look for? I mean, it's so ironic here, as you said, the government, has not had very much success, but then there are these examples of women on their own having success in negotiating with Boko Haram. But the need for the government to recognize and support that. And you pointed to the fact of the way Islam is practiced and thought, the traditional beliefs not supportive of it. But are there any positive examples that you can point to where you've had leaders, government recognizing the effectiveness? So in these kinds of situations of what women have done in terms of negotiation, I'm just wondering if there's anything like positive you see happening in that domain or not.
Yeah, they have been. They have been women who have negotiated with Boko Haram directly, and as a direct result of that, the government has backed them. and given them support. The incidences are not very, very large, but I think to be fair, in my own case, I mean, I did work at the very top of government, had a lot of autonomy to really design a national program on conflict, and I wasn't restricted at all in terms of which tables I appeared at. So they have been some examples. The problem is that there's so few and far between. Overwhelmingly, these processes are led by men.
Yeah, yeah. Suzan, yeah, I'm going to go back to you. And also, I don't know if you see us, this was actually on what we were talking about earlier, but Karen Ribeiro has asked about what needs to happen to safeguard the women legislators that you mentioned before, so they feel capable of working on women's issues. This was, so I don't know what else you were going to say, but that was a question specifically on that issue.
Yeah, this question, yeah, it needs, like, it's connected to everything. It's connected to women leadership. It's connected to political will. It is connected to raising awareness, to change mindset. It's connected also to how to have the experience, changing experience with other countries, especially Tunisia. They have very good laws, but again, the importance, also the implementation. So this is why it's process, and we have to work on continuous basis, not to work for a period of 1 year, because the project it's for 1 year. Then it's finished and we have to stop, and then we are again going backward. So this is the problem. We don't have a sustained projects, a long-term projects to work on such issues. I cannot say that government, they doesn't have any positive things. They have positive things, and they are doing sometime between time to time some good things, like they build shelters for women. They have a special institution like to deal, sorry, to provide service for victims. But the problem, it is not on continuous basis. It's not institutionalized. It's not institutionalized work. It comes because this a decision, a person who is in a decision center, he believes in this. But when this person changed, another person came, everything will be changed. So how to institutionalize the work of women issue? We have very weak mechanism for women machinery. They deleted the Ministry of Women Affairs, and they've just put a directory. So what's the power of this directory? What's the authority of this directory to work on a huge issue for women in Iraq, with all the victims, all what happened, the poverty? So it needs a strong machinery. It needs a high level Ministry of Women Affairs. It should be returned again. Resource and budget is, sorry. The allocation of budget and resource, it's important. We know that there is a different strategies beside the National Action Plan. The second National Action Plan, there is the strategy for women advancement in Iraq. There is the strategy to combat violence against women. But the problem, how to reflect the strategies, to translate it in plans. Each ministry, they have to plan, and what kind of resource is available to implement. So this is all, it is a challenges. It's not only to have strategies and plans, it means women, they are in a safe hand, but it is more, the implementation, it's more important, and allocating resource. So it means to believe in it. So what we need to strengthen the role of civil society, of women organization, of women feminists, how to institutionalize the organization, how to have a strong networks, because they are the key player, because they are doing the changes. They will influence to do these changes. And also how to guarantee a sustainable funds for those networks and organization. because this is how the organization active for 1 year, and then they will be frozen for another year because there is no fund. This is all the things that need, and also one thing, monitoring and having indicators to show with evidence the reality, the fact of women, the situation, how they are living. So we have to have indicators and the difference between year to year, and also monitoring on the implementation of all the international convention and resolution. There should be a serious monitoring. For example, CEDAW, Iraq still has a reservation on articles, and especially the articles related to the personal status law and the penal code, all related to marriages, to education. So if there should be a pressure, international community pressure, and also the to use their political will, how to remove the reservation, how to have equal rights. So all these kind of things, it's very important. So there is a big need to support more like women issue in Iraq through all these tools that I mentioned.
Yeah, no, those are all, your point about the sustaining support, because, you've both described in different ways. Well, certainly, and there's been a number of comments here from Nigeria, from Kaltumi and Kurutsi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your names, just saying, kind of similar. There's, there are policies, but no implementation. And women in general aren't recognized. I'm curious, on this important point about sustained effort, that you don't just, whether it's international aid efforts, or an NGO coming and doing a project for a year. Obviously, that's a big challenge. I'm looking at that. We have very limited time, and I would be great to hear from both of you, and I'll turn to Fatima first, on where you feel at the international level, and whether it be at a sort of UN level of international policy or bilateral policy, donors, and little organizations like Karuna, who are coming in to do well-intentioned projects to support organizations like Neem and WEO, but how, what more can and should happen, how we can all work more effectively to try to support these kind of long-term shifts that are needed, that have to be done obviously over time, that these kinds of mindsets that you described, I mean, these are deeply ingrained patterns in patriarchal societies that I mean, there was Nigeria where things have seemed to have gone backwards from what you said, Fatima, in terms of less women involved in politics at a political level. So I think that would be my last question for both of you, of looking at, from the outside, the international community, international organizations can do, obviously it needs to be sustained, but to where that they can be most helpful in all of these major challenges you've outlined. So Fatima, can I turn to you for sort of last comments on that, or anything, and then to Suzan, and then we will have to let you all go. Fatima, you're muted. No. Well, Fatima, while we're waiting for you, maybe we've lost you connectivity wise. Suzan, we'll go to you, just back to you. I mean, sort of on the how, I mean, you've outlined a lot of these challenges of what's needed, but where you feel like international actors, be there, at a multilateral level or bilateral level, have been or can be more, can play a more constructive or helpful role in addressing these challenges.
Yes, we are talking a lot about protection for victims, but also we have to talk about protection for women activists. What what kind of protection is available for women activists, because we are also in a risk, because we are criticizing, we are talking all about the gaps, and we are talking locally, nationally, regional base and international level. So also this is very important. If anything happened, how I can guarantee that I have protection? This is very important. And also the second thing, as I mentioned, I will repeat it again, it is very important to strengthen like the institutions, the women organization as an institution, how to be strong institutionally. So this is very important, because this is how guarantee the sustainability of this organization. And also the networking, it's networking on regional level, on international level, how to have the arena at international level and global level to talk, to amplify the voice, because this is how to put more pressure on the country, like to talk about all the challenges that we have to talk about, and also to focus on monitoring, because we don't want only to talk, but we have to depend on some concrete evidence that we have. So research, reports, and especially on monitoring. For example, since we have CEDAW and we have the Resolution 1325 and all the followed resolution, but there's no a real serious monitoring on the implementation. If Iraq says we have the second national action plan, okay, you go, you succeeded. So this is it's not like only to say this. We need a report how to implement it. What's the indicator? How many women that you have in military, in Ministry of Defense, high rank? How many women in Ministry of Interior? How many women in the executive authority? We have only quota in parliament, but we don't have quota in the executive authority. So this is why there is a big gap in government with lack participation of women. So this is all, it's important. And also the international support to women organization, also it gave it will become a strong bond for women organization. So this is very important, and solidarity between women in like on international level and local level. So this is also, it gave more support that we are not alone. There is too many women who supporting us, and this is their solidarity. If I am in a risk, so I have too many other women who will raise their voice, amplify their voice for me. So this is very important how we can continue, because also sometimes we feel we are at risk, so we have to stop. So this is very important to the protection and the solidarity and networking.
Yeah.
And this is the international arena also, it's very important.
Thank you, Suzan. And I'm seeing kind of echoes. And I think we might have Fatima back. I see her name. We're going to see if we can hear her or not. But I'm here, some of the comments that, from Nigeria, from Kaltumi, I guess, are similarly saying, similar things. So I'm just going to see, Fatima, are you there? Can we hear you?
Yeah. I'm so sorry about the network issues today, but I can hear you. So I think for me, I'd probably like us to end on a more hopeful note.
Yes, that would be nice.
If we really look at what's going on, this conflict has really increased the level of women in education. There are more girls going to school than ever before. There are more women who are engaged in socioeconomic activities and in the workplace. So what seems to have happened is that women are really finding their own agency, partly because of the response to conflict. So I think that these things are long-term. This is the time to invest even more in education for girls, in empowerment for women to be able to have sources of livelihood. I think this is not the time for the international community to get tired. A lot of this work is long-term. Very often people get tired and go to the next more topical thing, for example, on the horizon. So you get funding that is short-term, unsustainable. And I think women struggle so much more than men in terms of trying to find funding. So if funding can be more targeted towards women-led organizations, women-led initiatives, and these projects don't have to be big, but if they can be a bit more long-term. And I think on a final note, I'd say that a lot of dialogue convenings, international conferences are supported by the global north, and demands can be made that there should be a certain amount of women that sit on those tables, because very often governments are allowed to nominate who they want. But if there is a pushback to say, you know, we need to hear voices of the other half of society, perhaps these things will begin to change. But on the whole, I see that things, even in the darkness, I see that there's a lot of positive changes, even for society, for in terms of women's representation. We might not see it today, but these are happening now, and within another decade, I think things could be very different for women and girls. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Fatima, and thank you for that positive note. And I agree, you know, the emphasis on, as you said, education, I think you could not possibly disagree. I mean, the more that girls are in school, including in places like Afghanistan, where it's just tragic, the huge backward steps, but is critical. And I think, you know, you've both raised the important, you know, it is long-term. I mean, these are huge changes that need to happen. And obviously there's been some backward and forward movement. And to Suzan's point about the need for, you know, whether it's quotas, for women's representations, but also to you know, accountability, whether, you know, monitoring indicators, et cetera, that actually things are being done, as opposed to, yeah, we have the policy, check, but with actually bearing no real relation to things change on the ground. So anyways, this has been I thank you both, Suzan and Fatima, for being with us today, to sharing about your work and everything you've been doing, and for your work with us, and really all our thanks for sharing all this with us. And hopefully this will be inspiring to all of us, who it certainly has been to us at Karuna, for, you know, sort of moving on to support your work in any way we can. So with that, I want to thank all of our wonderful people who attended and took their time today to be with us, and to let you know that we're always happy for you to join us. And Laura, I think you have a last slide that we're going to put up, just to say we hope you can sign up for the next Karuna Connectors. We haven't announced it, but it will be announced soon, and we'll look forward to seeing you all the next round. And this is just, you know, ways to support the work, supporting, you know, stories, media, etc. Obviously this is very, you know, hugely important work that takes, you know, all of us to support in all of our different ways. So thank you again, Fatima and Suzan. Greatly appreciate your being with us and all your work, and to all of you who could join us. And we look forward and hope you can join us the next time. Thank you all. Thank you, Fatima. Wonderful to see you. And thank you, Suzan. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.